Welcome to a much colder than normal Monday Morning Express, where we got a little bit of a snowstorm brewing here.
Absolutely.
However, tell them where we are, Roland.
Well, we're here at Soundtracks in Durango, Colorado. So we're going to take a look inside and see what goes into making these decoders.
Yeah, beautiful modern facility. Let's start heading that way.
Before we
I'm
freeze.
getting cold. So we're joined by Nancy Workman, Chief Operating Officer of Soundtracks. Nancy, thanks so much for taking a little time out of your busy Monday to show us around your beautiful facility.
Sure, no problem.
Hey, now, wasn't Jimmy with us?
Who?
Jimmy Booth here in
Jimmy.
Durango? Where did he go?
Where's Jimmy?
I think he got a head start on the tour. Anyways, Nancy, tell us the first thing you're going to show us a little bit.
Okay, well, we're going to go off into this hallway here, which takes us right alongside of our production floor, which is about 9,000 square feet of manufacturing space. I'm going to show you our SMT line, which consists of 2 pieces of robotic equipment, a automatic stencil printer, and a thermal oven. And we'll sort of explain what each of those pieces of equipment does as we go through the hallway.
Well, Roland, I feel like we're in a James Bond movie or something.
Sure looks that way.
We mentioned it's high tech, but we see why Jimmy had his booties on, because this is a clean area. You have to wear special footwear or a bootie and a lab coat to go behind the glass, correct,
That is
Nancy?
correct. That is
Of course,
correct.
Jimmy had one on his head. But
Yeah, that was his own idea.
Right?
Yeah.
That was Jimmy being Jimmy.
Well, hey, Nancy, tell us a little bit about the machinery that we're looking at here.
Sure. What you're looking at is essentially our SMT line, which stands for Surface Mount Technology. And the first piece of equipment that you're looking at over here is our stencil printer. And the stencil printer takes the place of a human being who used to actually take a squeegee and pull the solder paste across the stencil so that it places that solder paste exactly where it needs to be on the panel. The problem with a human being doing it is, of course, they can't keep the pressure nice and even. And if there's nothing that there's nothing worse than having inconsistent processes in manufacturing. So we invested in this piece of equipment which keeps that pressure steady. It lines everything up with this stencil, which think about it like stenciling a t-shirt. It's the same kind of a thing, except that it's a metal stencil. It lines up to fiducials that are on the little stencil. It's basically just a mark on the stencil that says this is where the camera lines up. Solder paste will then get put on the panel, and as soon as it's done, it automatically comes out of the stencil printer and onto the conveyor belt that you see here.
So it's a lot of precision.
A lot of precision. That's
Okay.
right. Yeah.
And that machine's able to keep up with the rest of your process. It can
Yes,
handle enough.
that's correct. In fact, we don't want that particular process to get too far ahead because the solder paste can dry out. So if you had 100 boards waiting to get through the line and you weren't going to be able to get them through that surface mount line at the end of the day, that would be a bad thing. So it's very carefully monitored how much goes through that stencil printer.
Okay. Well, let's take a look at the next one.
Yeah, so if we walk down here, you'll see there are actually 2 pieces of equipment that look identical, because they are. These are sometimes referred to as robots. They are our pick and place machines, is what we call them. Either terminology is correct. What these machines do is they pull parts off the reels and put them on the exact place they need to go on the panels. Now, one of the things that we really liked about this equipment is that it's a magazine system, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. But basically, there's a magazine where all the reels sit in, and it pulls all those parts. If we run out of parts on a particular reel, you pull out the magazine. The machine is smart enough to know that magazine is no longer available. It will go on, and it will pull parts from the next magazine until you've put it back in.
Really?
And then it will pick up where it left off. It will go back on to the first magazine and pull the parts that it needs. A lot of people ask, why do you have 2 machines running side by side? We found that it's actually a lot faster. We can split it into 2 jobs. We can run 2 different jobs at the same time. We almost never do that. It's just not that efficient. But what we do is on the first machine, we run the small, we'll call them penny parts that run very fast. They're not worth a lot of money in the scheme of things if we have a problem, but more than anything, you can place them very quickly. More parts per minute, for example. The next machine, we slow down for heavier parts because all the parts are picked up with compressed air. Okay, it's like a little suction cup tool that picks up the parts and places them down on the board. So if you don't have the compressed air, then you can't pick up the parts. So heavy parts need a little slower time on the machine. So we have fewer parts running a little bit slower, and it's timed perfectly. So as it comes out of the first machine and onto the conveyor belt, goes down, gets picked up by the second machine, into the machine, all the heavy parts are placed and comes back onto the conveyor belt.
Well, it sounds like you've had a lot of time to streamline this process.
And hey, you mentioned all of these lines hanging down here.
So that's where all the compressed air comes in. And this is, we talked about it being a clean room. It's also got a reverse pressure system so that dust and things like that are sucked out and not in. And the air is circulated so it's nice and clean. It's a lead-free process, so we don't have any fumes. So that's all pretty good.
Very nice.
As we come down here, you'll see there's the end of the conveyor right here. But if you look straight through there, you'll see there are two pieces of equipment. One on the right is called our flying probe tester.
Sounds very interesting.
It's the coolest piece of equipment on the floor. It really is neat, and we'll take a look at that.
Sure.
And but what it does is it takes these little tiny probes, and again, it lines up based on the programming that we have provided for it, lines up with those circuit boards, and it goes down and it tests all the electrical connections. Wow. So it can tell us that the connection's being made, or it's not being made, or oops, heaven forbid, we have a wrong part. By the way, the machine also tests for that, so that would be pretty unusual for it to find a wrong part, because our SMT line will also identify wrong parts. But the flying probe tester is, it's probably the most futuristic looking piece of equipment that we have. And it'll generate a report afterwards and say everything is good, or sometimes it'll say you're missing a connection on this board. Could be a cold solder joint, unlikely, could be something called a tombstone. And generally that's just because of the way the release is with the pressure. Sometimes you'll get something that will stand up on end and they call it a tombstone.
Okay.
And so it just needs somebody to apply a little heat and it plops down and your connection is made.
Very
This
nice.
last big piece of equipment over here is our thermal oven. Think about it like a big pizza oven. It's got a big conveyor in there. The circuit boards, or the panels of circuit boards I should say, come out of the SMT line, go onto that conveyor. It's all temperature controlled, computerized, so it very gradually heats things up, gets to a certain temperature where the solder paste now melts. That's making, think of it as electronic glue. It's made your connection electronically as well as adhering the parts to the circuit board so that when you pick it up they don't fall off. It will cool down at the other end so that it can be handled and you can pick it up and examine it. Almost everything that we make here has two sides, so at some point it will come back through the assembly line again, place parts on the second side, and come through, and this whole process gets repeated.
Wow, we can see it moving there. It's pretty neat. Well, thank you. This is fascinating. I mean, we're looking forward to heading upstairs and talking a little bit more about the history and when you got started. But I think we're already seeing, Roland, there's a lot more that goes into this than we, and I'm sure our viewers ever realized for that, getting that sound in our model trains.
Yeah, a lot of sophistication here, a lot of high-tech equipment. So.
We've invested pretty heavily in our capital equipment. We really believe in it. For those who are unaware that we make this stuff here in Durango, Colorado, the labor is obviously a key component, and anything that we can do to pay more to fewer people and have machinery that helps do the job, so we have more skilled workers who can make a higher salary here in Durango, which quite frankly it's an expensive little town.
Yeah, right.
So that's the best thing that we can do is invest in our capital equipment.
And we're seeing it, of course, in a quality product that just keeps improving, keeps getting better. So
thank you.
We appreciate it. You obviously
thank
know
you.
an awful lot
Thank you.
about this.
Well, 28 years worth.
That'll do that.
Now we're going to Skype in here with Mr. Jack Vansworth of Division Point. How you doing today, Jack?
Doing well, doing well.
Good, good. Hey, what's that on behind your shoulder there?
Well, that's some of the K27s or AK27 and 28 that I did for my last run of HON3 models back in, gosh, it was early 2000s, 2003, I think they came in. And I just wanted to put them out here on my new layout diorama.
Yeah, I see that. The diorama looks good, buddy.
It's beautiful. It came from I don't take any credit for it. It all came out of the North Texas Narrow Gaugers, Mark Lachey and his group of great guys down there. And I'm extremely happy to have built a room for it. And I'm a happy camper. It's in essence.
Looks good.
You can see the narrow gauge engines look pretty good when the perspective is right on them anyway. So
narrow gauge always looks good, Jack.
We're going to talk about narrow gauge here. So listen, we just want to take this opportunity to talk a little bit about the K36s and the K37s. We have the project listed on our site at brasstrains.com, but go ahead and tell us a little bit about it. And we know there's a couple of special, combo sets that you got there too.
Obviously, I've got the plans, the actual plans and the plans from PBL that they cooperated with me for, and so we're just trying to do just like we did with these engines, the best we can possibly do. I found out a lot of little factoids, very interesting stuff from my friend Dan Feisel about the K36, K37 that we're going to try to incorporate into this project. Little nuances, little factoids that I didn't know. For instance, when it comes to plows, I assumed that all the K36s and K37s had plows, but actually that's not true.
Right.
Most of the K36s did. I think all of them did. But there were only, I believe it's 4 K37s that had plows.
So you're going to be including that in these versions as they were, right? On the 36s and 37s. Okay.
Absolutely. If it's a 37 and it never had a plow, there's not going to be one in the box. So don't be looking for it. It won't be there. Another great factoid, which I never realized, and I couldn't believe it when I heard it. And so I researched it, and it is true. Dan told me that sometime after 52, they lost or broke one of the stencils to do the flying grand on the tender. Normally the flying grand leans forward, if you will.
Right.
So on the fireman's side, the R leans forward. On the engineer's side,
it's back.
The last letter in the E leans forward. On engine 487 and 497, they actually used the same stencil from the fireman's side on both sides. And so if you look at pictures between 52 and the end of service in 1960, you will see 497 and 487 both have backwards, if you will, flying grands on them.
So it's not that it's wrong, it was made that way, right?
It was made that way. That's exactly right.
What kind of model details, like lighting and so forth, are we going to see on these, Jack?
Even in HON3, all the markers are lit. The headlight is lit. The number boards are lit on the thing. I have a cab light in there and a backup light. I mean, you can't get any more lights.
Yeah, very nice.
Well, hey, listen, so we know that there's 15 versions. 5 of them have the green boiler, right?
That's correct.
And you're doing that actually as a special set number 2 in just the 5 green boilers. And then you're doing a special collector set with the laser engraved boxes, right?
Yes, that's correct for both of those.
Okay.
We're doing a very limited set of one of everything. That's not for the faint of heart. That's for, that's for a real collector, and it will come in a specially made walnut box, or whatever I can find, hardwood that engraves well.
Yeah.
And we'll probably have, I haven't decided what's going on the cover of that box, but you guys have seen enough of my special edition
they look good.
Boxes. They look really good.
Yeah.
So there's one version. It'll probably be 2 walnut boxes because getting 15 engines in one box is problematic. So it'll probably be 2 walnut boxes identical that will be shipped with the entire collection. And then we're going to do another 5 engine set. And that's coming in the same type of box, and that will be all the green boiler models that we're doing.
Okay. So now when can we expect delivery, you think?
I'm being told that they will be here in August.
August. Okay. So,
Yeah.
well, it's an exciting
Yeah.
project, one that no doubt we're looking forward to. Hey, we appreciate you taking a few minutes out, spending some time with us. You know, those are some cool details, and we're looking forward to delivery of this HON3 project.
Well, thanks for getting the word out there for me.
Well, Charlie, when I was really getting into the hobby, there were two builders that really inspired me. Last season, we got to talk to one, George Celios, with the Franklin in South Manchester, and the other one was this guy, Malcolm Furlow.
Malcolm Furlow, sure.
So for me especially, what a treat to be here within the San Juan Central. But tell us a little bit about where you got this and where it's going to end up.
The San Juan Central, as you know, was a model railroader project railroad back in the early 1980s, and they hired Malcolm Furlow, who was a noted modeler then and now, to build it for them. They published that book, which inspired a lot of us, me included, which is still in print now. Benchmark Publications, which puts out the Gazette, or did put out the Gazette, has a second edition. And it's still selling very well, so your instincts were good. But this is the only narrow gauge project railroad model railroader ever did. It was seminal for many of us in narrow gauge. This was one that got us excited. 8 by 10. It was using off-the-shelf stuff. Atlas flat car loads became a bridge, for example. Plastruck pieces, which don't support anything because there's plywood under here. It just had that look. And Malcolm is an artist and was an artist, so he had that look. After the articles appeared in Model Railroader, it went on the road. And it was moved every couple of weeks. It went to another train show for a whole year. And you think, oh my gosh, how could they do that? Well, it's portable. This is all foam. There isn't any plaster on here at all. It's all construction foam that you spray into a mold, as explained in the book, and slap on your grade, and there it is, subsurface, and there it is. And he would stain it, and there's an art to that. Some of it is made of, the molds are made of coal, which makes a great rock face. Some of the molds are made of weathered, petrified wood, like this piece over here, this piece over here. So it was robust. It was then auctioned off by MR in a sweepstakes, and an N-scale guy ended up with it, which he had no use for it. He then sold it to a hobby shop, who then, when they went out of business, sold it to another modeler, who then sold it to me back in, about 10 years ago. And I bought it for the simple reason that, number one, it's beautiful. It still holds up well. It even runs. But secondly, I wanted to put it in a museum. And lucky for me, the National Model Railroad Association is, in conjunction with the California State Railroad Museum, is doing something we call the gallery exhibit, which I know you're interested in, which is going to be, we call it the magic of scale model railroading. It's going to be an exhibit in their gallery level, hence the name, which is the mezzanine level above the roundhouse part, if you've been to that museum. And it will be the only exhibit on scale model railroading in a major rail museum anywhere in the world. So it's going to be, I think, spectacular. And we're building it right as we speak. And this will be encased in plexiglass. So this is about the last chance anybody comes and actually can do this.
Touch it.
And actually touch it. And actually look at it close.
Yeah.
But it'll
beautiful.
be close up. You'll be able to see it. And the entire explanation of what this railroad was will be explained to the public, and they will see what a model railroad looks like. Now, considering this was built in about 1982, it holds up pretty well.
Sure
today's
does.
technology is way past this. This is pre-DCC. Malcolm used Dynatrol, which was an analog early version of DCC. We disconnected that when we restored it. Bob Brown, editor of the Gazette, and myself. Yeah, but it still, like I said, runs on regular DC, but it will not be operating. It's too fragile for that. But it'll hopefully inspire the public to be able to stand right where you're standing and look at all the details and go, wow, this is neat. And then maybe we ought to look into this hobby. Now, the California State Railroad Museum last year had over 600,000 paid entrants.
Wow.
Many of them school kids, seniors on tour. It is the 6th most popular tourist destination in California.
Really?
Which people will go, wow, that's crazy.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
if you haven't been, it is a spectacular
must see.
railroad museum. And one of the most exciting parts for the NMRA, besides being able to have a display that we create in space we could not buy. It's a state institution. You just can't go in there and say, I want to buy some space and put up an exhibit. They're as excited as we are about this exhibit because they wanted to tell the story of scale model railroading. They have something called the Sefton Toy Train Museum exhibit in there, which is on tin plate. But they had nothing on scale. Even though they have 29,000 pieces in their collection of scale equipment, including brass, almost everything Sidem ever made, for example, is in their collection. Wow. But they have nowhere to put it. So our exhibit will work hand in glove with their interest in showing the public what model railroading is all about.
And what
so
size
we're very
did you
excited.
say that exhibit was going to be about?
It's about 3,000 to 5,000 square feet total, but it's in a very interesting space. It'll have a little bit. The first thing you're going to see when you walk in is this, and then you're going to go into a little bit of the history of the hobby, which is extremely interesting. Did you know there is a connection between our hobby and the Titanic sinking? Well, there is. There is. I'm going to leave that as a tease because that's part of the exhibit. Yeah. Walt Whitman wrote a poem including a reference in 1846 to a garden railroad. So there's a lot of these interesting things. And our hobby in the NMRA really started during the Depression. Now, you would not think that would be a time to start a hobby, but our hobby really blossomed and began during the Depression in the 1930s. World War II, we have the era when our hobby manufacturers went into war work, but they promised the boys, when you come home, there will be a hobby for you. And it exploded in the 50s. And the era of brass, two of your previous folks who were interviewed on this wonderful Morning Express you have, Reed Dennis and Kevin Shanahan, are contributors of fabulous brass pieces that we are going to be displaying as part of this exhibit. So people who want to see those gold-plated engines can come to Sacramento, and they're going to be all 10 of them will be there with a story of why they're gold-plated. That kind of thing. We're gearing the exhibit toward the public. It is not a model railroader exhibit, but people who are model railroaders will obviously enjoy it. We'll have for example, if you know it, John Allen, famous name. We have his original time saver switching layout, which survived the fire that destroyed his home and his layout. That'll be on exhibit. So we have a lot of things for people who are both in the hobby and people who want to learn about the hobby. So we're very, very excited about that.
Yeah, I know this is something, Charlie, that you personally and your team have been working on behind the scenes for years.
Almost a decade.
But we're getting pretty close to it coming to fruition now.
It should be open by the end of this year, at the very latest, early next. That's kind of scary because there's a tremendous amount of work. Everything from getting videos of normal, ordinary, that's an oxymoron, model railroaders, because the museum really wants people stories. Why are you a model railroader? I was worked for the California Attorney General for 40 years. In fact, I was at one time the attorney for the California State Railroad Museum. So why am I a model railroader, for example? Why is Bill Gates' Japanese partner a model railroader, Sam Furukawa? Why is Rod Stewart, rock star, why is he a model railroader? We hope to have videos of some of these people on a loop when visitors come through who can see what model railroading is about, but also the backstories. Why do people do this? And have the breadth of model railroading, traction, structures, operators, narrow gauge, and anything that is of interest. We should have something about it.
So, Charlie, we've been looking at some of the nice photos of this layout. I mean, it seems like it's right here upon us, but it's actually quite large when you see it in this room. I just want to ask a couple of questions. Now, you mentioned that this is the rock and everything is foam here, so that means the top part of it is somewhat light.
Yes.
In that regard.
It is light. The bottom is, I think he used any piece of heavy timber he could find, so the bottom weighs a ton, so you have to make sure you don't flip it from its, but it does move. It breaks in 3 pieces and goes out the door, and there it is.
Yeah, that makes it beautiful. We can just break it apart like that. We see the sections here, and so you guys will be able to take it up to the museum.
Take it up to the museum.
Very, very nice.
And,
one more thing I wanted to, I mentioned, and I got this, we saw some of the pictures. We appreciate in the back there with the mountains. Tell us that little trick there about
I can show you
how you make them look
I don't know if the
so
camera
realistic.
Can pick this up, but there's a little trick I learned when I did some Hollywood work. And when in my earlier days when I was at UCLA in college, didn't major in Hollywood work, but paid the bills. And that is the backdrop, and you can see from the shadows here, it might give away the trick, but the backdrop straight through here, which I think the camera or over here you can see it looks like there's a separation. Well, there is.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
You can see that there's a little separation about this much, and it's on the backdrop's on foam core, and the sky is on masonite. And so you have that little bit of separation, and from a distance, the eye
gives it depth.
Gives it depth.
Right?
It's just a trick that was used in Hollywood all the time.
And it's important to paint the edge of that foam core, obviously,
no, it
so
isn't.
it kind of blends in. No, really.
No.
Okay.
The other trick, because Hollywood people are lazier than crap.
Yeah.
No, I'm going to get in trouble for that one. But what they do is they don't. You cut the foam core to fit about 1/8 inch below the paper.
So another trick, yeah.
Because nobody's ever going to touch the paper. You take your magic marker black along the paper.
Right.
Wow.
That gives a shadow. Don't touch the foam core. And bam, there you go. Because coloring foam core edges is a bloody pain.
Yeah.
Well, it looks great.
Well, thank you.
A few little tricks.
The San Juan never had a backdrop, by the way, so the backdrop will be going up with it. And it'll be viewed just like the camera's seeing it here from two sides, and then the back will have graphics explaining with that book all about it. And then people can go down to the museum shop and buy the book and be inspired like you were.
That's right. Well, we hope
it comes full circle.
We hope it inspires a lot more modelers in the future, and we're obviously excited to see that brass is going to have such a prominent part.
It will. It's part of our story
as well.
Yeah. Brass is a big part of the model railroad story. As Bob Brown, who's been in the hobby since 1946, I think, or 44, said once, he said, before brass, you couldn't get a mechanism that ran. And now you might laugh thinking, well, you couldn't when we got brass either, but no, that isn't true. But he said when brass came, it was a revolution. All of a sudden you could buy something that ran at a reasonable price. And yes, by today's standards, maybe in those early days it didn't run great, but it ran.
Sure.
And it was, had fidelity to the prototype that was unheard of in prior days. Only the few custom builders could get to that level. And he said he remembered when it came in and it was just revolutionary. So that's the story we want to convey to the public, and also that it's still a part of the hobby.
It sure is.
Yeah.
You're watching Monday Morning Express, and I'm here with one of Soundtrack's most famous residents, Sadie. Say hi to the camera, Sadie.
Here we are in the machine shop, and now that the 476 is finished, they're hard at it with the 480, which is a K36. And Charlie, you can tell us a little bit about what you're doing. We'll start with the drivers, since that's the base of the locomotive. What did you do to the drivers?
So the drivers were reconned. We didn't have to put new tires on because there's still meat to them. You want to get the maximum life out of them. So we just reconned them so they're fresh. They don't have tread hollow. In addition, we also did the box work, which means, replacing crown brass that are too thin or loose in the box. Then we fix that because you want everything tight. You don't want the crown brass loose in the box. And they've been machined out, and we poured new Babbitt hub liners on them as well. And so they are ready to be assembled onto the box. And from there, we will set our saddle heights for our spring rigging. And the shoes and wedges have been laid out and trammed and shimmed accordingly. So here in the next week, those will be going back up underneath the 480. And then the 482s will be coming out, and we will restart that process.
So you guys don't mess around. Now, we look at these side rods here. They look like they're brand new.
We do actually have two new middle connection rods here that are brand new. Eventually, you can only bore out so much before your hole sizes are too large. And you do have a brass bushing, which is designed to take the wear, but over time, you have to bore out the steel to accommodate, the OD press fit. And, well, when you consider it, they're from the 30s and 40s. I think we've gotten the life out of them.
So what's a new one of this set of these rods cost, Charlie?
You're looking close to around $30,000.
For each link?
Yeah.
For each length. So for a full set, we're looking at...
You're looking, $250,000 or so.
That's more than a PBL model.
Yeah, so if you think our brass models are expensive, why don't you try rebuilding a real locomotive?
Yeah.
But if you consider, if you set that amortize that across the entire amount of service life, it's actually pretty cheap.
Sure.
The initial cost is certainly expensive, but by the time you figure the life expectancy you get out of it, it's worth the investment.
Good. And we got some pistons down here?
Yep, we have pistons. Those are out of the 480, and those are actually being replaced by brand new ones, which are actually chucked up in one of our lathes. And those will be machined to fit the crosshead layered, and then those will be reassembled.
So when do you think you'll have the 480 back in service?
We have to have the 480 back in service by the beginning of March, and it'll be ready for the Silverton season. And once the drivers are up on the 80, the 82 will be the next one to come out.
Well, very good. We really appreciate it. This is a rare opportunity to be able to see a locomotive in this state of repair.
Yeah, you guys come at the right time to see it right before it gets put back together. And down here is a driver out of the 482, which you can see the wear on, and you can compare it to a freshly reconned one on the 480.
Yeah. Well, since we got the running gear education, how about we take a look at the boiler shop?
That sounds great. Let's check out the boiler swedging machine and everything that we do for the tube work.
This is where the heart of the locomotive is, the flues and superheater tubes. And so, Charlie, could you help us with some of the machinery to tell us how you manufacture these?
Sure. So these are superheater units. We start out with the SA192 material, which is a seamless. And we weld on the ends, which are, as you can see here, the ball joints. Those fit into the headers. And every time we take these out or take the front end apart, we hydro them to verify that they're sound and don't have holes in them, because this is where the steam goes through and gets recycled through one more time to create that superheat. Over here we have our McCabe flanger, and that's how we bend our radiuses for our sheets and tube sheets, and it does a really nice job. It sure beats doing it by hand. Right here is our bandsaw for cutting the tubes to length, and over here is our swedging machine, because they have to be swedged on the firebox side, and that's basically where you use a die and a hydraulic press and you squeeze it down to a smaller diameter so it fits into the sheet on the fireman side, or the firebox side, excuse me. And then we have our general stay bolt machine over here for mass production stay bolts. Stay bolts are 12 threads per inch, sharp V, and it's a boiler thread. So we have the dies for that to make that, and it goes really quick. And then we have our annealing oven right over here, which is what we do to cook the ends of the tubes, and makes it a lot easier to roll it into the sheets, which when you roll it into the sheets, that's where you have your mechanical fixation to where it seals.
Seals them up.
And then you beat them and seal weld them. So it makes it a lot easier when you're rolling it into the sheet if you anneal the ends.
So we can see that your roundhouse is fully equipped to rebuild a locomotive from the drivers all the way to the boiler.
It really is. We do pretty much everything we can in-house. It's cost effective to do it that way. There are some things we send out, but the majority of it, we have 22 guys here and a gal in our purchasing department, which helps us obtain the parts and fittings and everything that we need. And you know, it takes a lot of people to make this show happen here.
Yeah, well, your guys are doing quality work from the looks of everything we've seen today, and we really thank you for taking the time to spend with us to give us a really nice tour of the roundhouse.
Well, we appreciate you guys stopping by and joining us for the debut of the 76.
Well, between the museum, our giant brass shades, you probably wonder what Ron is up to next. So Ron, we actually kind of went back to one of the earliest projects you started on, which if somebody has been following us and even the early blogs, they would know we kind of reference as the city in the window.
That's right.
So tell us just a little bit about what you've been working on and how we're kind of bringing this project back and kind of full circle with it.
Well, what we did is we redesigned basically the location of it because it's been kind of homeless all this time.
Right.
And so we had to come up with a new window. And in this time we're doing it a little more in the 1940s type of feel to keep with the time period of the buildings inside.
Right, so originally there was like this window in my office. It was kind of that weird hallway, and we were trying to fill that. This time we had to create the window, so that's what you kind of see here.
Right.
Now, obviously, originally with the project and now the issue is depth. Like, how do we give that feel of depth? So talk a little bit about what you did with the wall and even some of the buildings.
Well, we're in a room that has a square corner, but we put the wall in at a 45, and that way I could maximize the depth back here in the corner. And
so you call that a cyclorama,
yeah,
right?
A cyclorama in the curved back corner back there, and that gives me the maximum depth. And then the buildings get smaller and smaller as they go back,
So
and much less detail, forced perspective, exactly.
And then even with the flats, you've explained what you did with those.
Yeah, we're staging flats using some HO background pieces and down to some Luan flats that I just cut out and silhouettes of skyscrapers, basically. And then we'll stagger them all the way back into the cyclorama to make it basically seamless. Otherwise, we'd have that big ugly line right up the middle, which we didn't want.
And this way, even as you walk by, you kind of start seeing that different perspectives.
Yeah,
and so forth.
it does double duty because we're getting our eyes adjusted to the darkness. It's like a light trap room, and the ceiling's coming down a little bit, and we're getting a little tighter of a feel as the scale gets reduced before we go into the museum.
Right. Now, obviously, it's in progress. We're going to play with the lighting, and that's going to do a lot to it. But with some of the structures you're kind of fitting in here, like let's talk about this building over here. What's the trick you use to even help more with that forced perspective?
Yeah, basically, it's just a generic building, but what I did was multiplied it by about 3/4 size going down one side, and the normal size in the front. So if you look at the building from the side, they are extremely foreshortened windows. So it buys some depth that I just didn't have before I hit the sheetrock of the room.
So it's a really neat trick that probably if you didn't point out, people wouldn't even notice, but it really does a great job of kind of expediting the perspective.
To grab
there.
a little bit more depth there that we don't have all the real estate here, but we certainly have more real estate in this room than we did at the old building.
Right.
Because we were just hiding a bunch of air conditioning, conduit and ugly stuff, and insulation and whatnot. So I do have a little bit more luxury of space here. But still, I wanted to maximize that, make that room feel, or the city feel like it just goes on and on.
And you're going to keep working with, right now, they're going to see kind of a seam there, but that's going to all get filled in, and that'll be a lot of fun. And also what you did here with the ledge and the little brickwork, it's pretty neat. Makes it feel like, you say, we're looking out of a window of a really
much more of a 1940s kind of a feel. We're actually going to put a old potbelly stove here that we got out of a caboose.
Which is kind of neat because it's scaled down.
It's scaled down.
That was out of a caboose, and this whole thing is scaled down.
So it'll seem like a normal size when it's here. And I actually made a little trap door back behind there. That'll hide the fiber optics and all the electrical that goes inside the room.
Cool.
To save having to get inside of it.
Well, I know this job has kind of been a pain, but P-A-N-E, right?
Yeah, no more. The pain's gone.
Okay, that is good. But we will keep working on it. And,
but that's how I get in there to work on it. So.
All right, well, thanks, Ron. We appreciate the update.
Thank you.
Keep up the good work.
All right.
And we'll get back with you guys as soon as we have a little bit more to show you later in the season as Ron continues to work on this project.
Welcome to another segment of How To with Hal. Hal, thanks for coming down again, visiting with us. You know, one of the things that a lot of customers have asked about is soldering, because that seems to be one of the most common problems, is that an individual, well, either they buy an engine, a detail piece is broken off, or they accidentally mishandle it and a piece breaks. So we need to know how to do a correct solder repair. But before we even get started with that, we have to make sure we have the proper tools, right? So tell us some of the tools that you have that, actually are used here in the soldering process. It's a must-have.
I'll go set this right here in front of you so the camera can pick it up. This is a Weller WES51. It'll go up to 850 degrees. I keep a wet sponge in the little tray here to keep the tip nice and shiny. And when you're using these things, don't keep it set at max temperature or you're going to burn the tip up.
So anywhere, sometimes between 700 when you're using it, 850.
On a
and go
piece
back
of
down.
brass, I go max on it.
Okay.
Depending on where it is on the engine. If it's
Right.
something real delicate, then I'll use a smaller tip.
Okay. But after you're done, you're saying turn it back down, back the
Yeah,
heat
back
off.
down. I don't let
back
it sit
off.
there and idle it hot.
Okay, so that's a very important tool to have. What else do you have here?
And then I have my little torch. This uses
Little mini torch.
propane and oxygen. Down here on the floor, I've got a pretty good sized oxygen bottle, and it'll last quite a while.
Okay.
And then the propane bottle, I buy that at Lowe's or Home Depot.
Right.
And it has its own regulator for the propane
Okay, very good.
built into it. Comes with the torch.
Okay. And we might want to say, even for safety, you might want to have, a little fire extinguisher around perhaps, or in this particular building, we got a complete fire system, so please, no fires today.
Well, if it starts to rain, I'll know what it is.
We'll know what it is, right? But anyway, so those are some important things. So now tell us a little bit about, the solder itself and some of the flux.
Okay, this is part lead, part tin. It just probably is rosin core. I always like the small stuff. I don't like this big stuff.
Right,
you get at
real
Radio
thin,
Shack.
yeah.
I haven't had good luck with Radio Shack solder.
Okay. And then tell us about your fluxes.
And the fluxes over here, I bought this at Florida Discount Jewelers in Orlando. It's used for working on jewelry. It says non-corrosive, but it is somewhat corrosive, but not like your other liquid fluxes.
So it's the Tix flux, right?
Yeah, Tix,
that's the brand.
TIX, Tix Flux. And this is anti-flux. Now, about the only time I use this, if I've got to repair a valve gear, say the rivet, I've got no more rivets left, and I got to solder the back of the rivet, I'll put this on the in between where the two valve gears pieces meet, and it will keep the solder from going into the rivet area.
So exactly where you want it.
So
then, right?
you don't
Yeah.
want to. That way, you'll still be able
Right.
to move the two valve gear pieces.
Okay.
I very seldom use this, but when I do, it's nice to have.
Right. And when we use flux, it's very little. You call it liquid gold, right? Because it can be expensive if you're not careful. You don't want to.
It's about I think $3 or $4 for
Yeah,
that
a
little
little
bottle.
bottle. Yeah. Okay.
But I know I've knocked over more than I've used.
All right. I've been there already. Very nice. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go through, and we've got a few models in this particular show. We'll show what you're going to do here. Explain to us some of the common things that you see on engines that need soldering.
Okay, I'm going to use a screwdriver as my pointer. First of all, a lot of people are brutal when they pick up models. And a lot of times these little air cooling pipe brackets will come unsoldered from the running board.
Right.
And it seems like they always come unsoldered after you got your model painted. Another one that's common to break is the plate that's soldered to the bottom of the cab and it screws to the frame. I've seen those come off a lot and break. Those are fairly easy to repair. I've seen pilots come unsoldered off the pilot beam.
Okay.
Now some of these repairs won't require much touch-ups. I've had to solder several years ago a O-scale B&O S1A. The original owner had super glued the pilot on. That is a no-no in this
right?
hobby.
Yeah.
Two things will take off super glue: acetone and fire.
Well, we could use one.
And I had to completely strip off the pilot beam of the super glue, sanded it down, took all the paint off the pilot and I used my little torch to put that one back on. But that was O-scale. That's a good sized piece of brass.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you what, let's go ahead and get started. And one of the things I took away from you at the outset was this cradle that you have. Now, we know foam cradle and heat, well, no good, right?
Yeah, it's just so I don't set a fire on my foam cradle. Okay, just before we started, you know, these brackets still have solder on them. And I went inside and I cleaned off the some of the paint. I'm not worried about paint under the running board.
Right.
You can always get a paintbrush after you're done
Touch up.
and touch it up. Now I'm gonna, got a little piece of toilet paper here, and we're gonna soak it in water. And I'm going to put it right there. You can see why I use toilet paper rather than paper towel. It stays put.
Oh, I thought you were going to say it goes down easier, but okay, it stays put.
Okay.
There you go. And the reason for it. Tell us the reason for it.
It's I'm putting this wet on here to keep the running board paint from blistering.
Right.
Some paint will blister
Right.
and some won't. Scale coat won't blister. It'll burn. Or it won't
Right,
blister.
right.
And
Because it's going to get hot in there, and so we want to keep that prevented as much as possible.
so I am going to put a little flux right where I scraped off some of the paint. Now I'm hoping that I can just remelt the existing solder. If that doesn't work,
You have to add
then
it.
I'll cut off a piece about 1 millimeter long and lay it in there with the tweezers.
Okay. Let's watch the master work.
So let's see. Where did you're hiding the tools there, Roland. Always point this away. I'll let you be in charge of that. I'm going to
And that
demonstrate
flame,
this little
yeah.
torch here a second to see the size flame. I don't know if I'll hold it over the
There
dark.
you go.
You can get real small. You always want to turn on the fuel first and the oxygen second. Now I'm going to go in there and take my tweezers and put on my Optivisor. And hoping I'm going to push this bracket in and go right down in there. I saw the solder flow, and it's soldered.
That fast, huh?
And I'm gonna, now the heat probably evaporated what little flux was in there, so I'll put another dab of flux on the next bracket. And I'll go in there with my torch. I see the solder flowing.
And that's all you want. Once you got that solder flowing, you just got to let it cool then after that,
Yep.
right?
That's why. And they're both soldered.
Okay.
And I'll turn it up. No damage to the paint. What you're going to see on there is a little moisture. Now you're going to have to go with your paintbrush and touch up your pipes here.
Right. And you know, isn't it, it's always important that after you have used solder, you've used flux, to make sure that you clean it off, right?
Yes, clean it up. Like this engine, if I had to, I'd take the mechanism off of it and I'd take it into my kitchen, take my kitchen sprayer and just spray it down good.
Okay.
Or just get in there with some paintbrush with some water on it and wash it off. We kind of
Right,
want to
right.
neutralize it.
Okay. So now it's nice and cool, so our solder has been made on there. Right?
And I kind of pushed it in a little bit, but I can bend it back out a little bit. There you go. So all you got to do now is go in there and touch up.
Excellent.
And that one's done.
Okay, that fast. We appreciate it. All right, that one is done. Excellent. We'll put the trucks and everything else back on, and our model will be ready to go.
We'll just set this over here.
Excellent. All right. Well, we'll take a quick break, and then what we'll do is we'll get our next model. How about that?
That sounds great.
All right.
We promised soundtracks was going to be high tech, and wasn't it cool?
Yeah, oh, absolutely loved it inside of there, and what a nice, hospitable group Nancy and her team are.
Yeah, and
So
when we
really
had
good.
to put the little booties on
Yeah.
and the lab coat.
Yeah, what about Jimmy with that stuff? That was like,
Yeah, I don't think he actually got.
he doesn't know where the
truly
booties
backstage.
go.
Yeah, he had that on his hair. It was a good thought. I think he thought he was performing surgery
Yeah,
or
right?
something.
That's Jimmy for you.
But it was more than we expected,
Sure.
and I'm sure our audience really loved it. And next week, we're going to take them, and with Nancy, we're going to have a little more of the history.
Yeah.
Because I think people think of Soundtracks as a modern company, and they've
Right.
been involved in the hobby a long time, so I'm sure our viewers will find that interesting.
Yeah, and we got some new info coming on the Tsunami 2 system. So a little behind the scenes there, which we're going to really, really enjoy.
Yeah, and they'll see how, as far as operators go, that new sound chip decoder will take your operating to a whole nother
Yeah,
level,
yeah.
either with diesel or steam. So they'll have to tune into the next few episodes to really see that.
Yeah, and of course on our How To with Hal, we're going to go a little bit deeper now into the soldering techniques. You know, we saw that in this episode, but we're going to see a little bit more of that next week, so stay tuned for that.
Yeah, that'll be great. So yeah, the second of 3. Now we got to see Charlie Getz with the Malcolm Furlow
Yeah.
layout, which was
Oh,
amazing.
wasn't it nice?
The update on the museum,
Yeah.
but also next week, Charlie's got a very unique hobby room. It's like a hobby shop.
Yeah.
I think we showed a little bit on the preview to this season, but kind of getting in there, and there's a neat story on a Craftsman kit that's very well known that's connected to Charlie.
Yeah.
And he has a secret obsession.
Yeah, I know.
It's not Legos.
I know what it is,
Yeah, but they will have to wait,
yeah,
our
right?
viewers.
Yeah.
So it'll be kind of a fun little tidbit.
Yeah.
What's Charlie Getz's secret obsession?
yeah, and hey, again, what is this? You're going downhill with this junk.
My little beer cooler. This is actually,
it?
it's not MME, it's EMD.
Oh.
I am proud that this
So
is
it's
an
train
official.
related.
Oh yeah, it's an electromotive EMD. What do you call him?
We call him a koozie,
Like Pat Cousineau?
like Pat Cousineau, director, right? Yeah. How's it taste? Good? Good.
Keeps my water cold, but like when I tried pouring coffee in there, it leaked all over.
yeah.
So that was
Hold
no
on.
good. So where's our mug?
I know. You know what it is they're so nice, it takes a long time to get that type of quality in these
Okay.
Tervis cups. So
I'll believe it when I see
they're
it.
coming, just patience.
Now, we wanted to let our viewers know that in addition on brasstrains.com to our normal beautiful array of new and used brass model trains, we've taken in a substantial amount of European brass. So if we have anybody who collects that, we have HOM, OM, Ferro-Swiss, Lamakel, Fugarex, some beautiful late run pieces.
Right.
So I know it's outside of what we normally do, but man, when you love trains and you love brass, some of those pieces, it's easy to fall in love with. So we just wanted to give a little notification to search our site for those.
Yeah, absolutely. Looking forward to seeing some more and more of those as they're listed. And Dan, I just wanted to mention next week we got a special announcement regarding our site.
Okay.
Something that our viewers are going to look forward to.
I can't wait.
All right.
And so we're going to close out with just a little bit more video from Howard Zane's layout, again, shot from our friend Forrest Nace.